So, Tower of God's been coming out recently, and it's really not as great as it's been hyped up to be. If the title of this video didn't give it away, I don't think it's great at all. I do think it's very good, but not great. At least not yet. But to be honest, beyond that, I don't really have one particular point to make with this video. I just kinda wanted to give my thoughts about the show. I guess this is kind of a review. Anyways, I'm just gonna go through the show and say what I thought about it. But before we start, I want to say that this is an analysis of Season 1 of the anime. This is not about the webcomic, so don't tell me it gets better. I know it gets better. I'm on chapter 349 of the webcomic and would not have read that far this quickly if it hadn't gotten much better than Season 1 is. But just because the series gets better does not make Season 1 better. I just wanted to say that to, hopefully, tone down the comments saying I'm not allowed to talk negatively about the anime because Season 2, and probably 3, of the webcomic are great. However, I will sometimes compare the anime to the first 78 chapters of the webtoon. And that was not a joke. The 13 episodes of Season 1 adapted 78 webtoon chapters. But rest assured, I'll only make comparisons when it's relevant, and not just to make you stare into the unholy images of the early webtoon. I assure you this is completely necessary. So Tower of God is about a boy named Bam who lives outside the titular tower with the only person he knows, a girl named Rachel. One day, Rachel decides to leave Bam because she wants to see the stars, and it's said that anything your heart desires exists at the top of the tower. Bam decides to climb the tower to find her, and thus the series exists. But before he's actually allowed to climb the tower, he has to take a bunch of tests to determine if he's worthy. In the first test, a girl named Yuri, who's already climbed the tower, lets him borrow a totally awesome, super cool anime sword called the Black March, and then Bam is warped to the next test almost immediately so he doesn't get a chance to return it. After this, Bam is in the main testing ground location surrounded by a colorful cast of characters, and the rest of Season 1 focuses on Bam and the rest of the characters taking tests to be deemed worthy of climbing the tower. If you watch even one episode of Tower of God, there are probably two things you'll notice. The first is the art style, and I've heard some negative opinions about it, and it definitely takes some time to get used to, but it really grew on me. I think it manages to simultaneously look really rough and really refined at the same time, plus it makes the fantastical elements of the world feel even more otherworldly and awe-inspiring. For example, look at how the show depicts Shinsu, which is the magic water that acts as the power system. It looks like water, but it also doesn't. It fuses multiple colors, light blue, dark blue, and green, all of which are colors of water, which keeps it looking like water, but because they're all different colors, it also doesn't. It also has a strange texture that doesn't look like water, and combining that with the art style, it all feels alien but beautiful. This art style alone makes it a joy whenever Shinsu appears. Well, except for in the scene. The other thing you'll notice if you watch even a single episode is that Bam is a terrible main character. Moreover, he's just a terrible character. His personality starts and stops at one-dimensionally positive and never deviates from that. To make matters worse, he has no depth to make up for that. He doesn't do or think anything interesting. Hell, he barely even has a thought process at all. He also barely shows any emotion. He is sometimes happy and occasionally sad, and that is his entire emotional range thoroughly exhausted. Unless you count Clueless as an emotion. I mean, there is one other time Bam shows emotion, but that was during the scene, so I'm ignoring that. What the show is trying to do with Bam is make him seem innocent, but it also completely fails at that. In fact, I only know that's what the intention was because the characters in the show repeatedly talk about how Bam has the innocence that they don't, but that never comes through in his actions because nice and innocent are not the same thing. There were opportunities to make him seem innocent, like in one of the tests where he has to grab onto the character Rak to ally with him, but Rak is insistent on wanting to fight Bam, so what Bam does is agree to fight, and then immediately drops his weapon and doesn't try to fight back. Rak refuses to attack until Bam picks his weapon back up, but the scene could be spun to be like Bam naively refusing to fight even at the cost of his own safety, but that interpretation is ruined because the other character present, Kun, has an internal monologue about how Bam is stalling for time because he knows that Rak won't attack him like this. Thus, the idea that Bam is being innocent is ruined, and this scene doesn't even do a good job of setting Bam up as clever because he never does anything clever for the rest of the show, so the scene fails to make Bam interesting at all. There's one other good opportunity the show had to execute on Bam being innocent. Basically, there's a scene where Bam stands up to one of the more powerful characters in the show, and when asked why he did it, he says it was because not doing it would have been breaking one of the rules Rachel taught him for how to be a good person. This could set Bam up as someone who lives by oversimplified black and white definitions of what is and isn't good, and there's a lot of potential in that. But no, the scene where this idea is set up is literally the only one it's relevant for. Overall, Bam is just a terrible character, and by far the worst thing about Tower of God. And him being a terrible character means that we don't care at all about anything the main character of the show says or does, thus removing any investment the audience has in any situation where his personal well-being is at stake. But the audience not caring about Bam has more side effects. You see, Rachel is only ever defined as a character in how she relates to Bam, and because we don't care about Bam, it makes us not care about Rachel. Aside from these two, however, Tower of God does a pretty good job with its characters. They mostly have personalities built around one trait, like how Haas is just the honorable swordsman archetype, and Lorelei is just constantly trying to sleep, but they're all pretty likable in spite of that. There's also one character, this chick whose name I forgot, who has a personality but also has one pretty good moment of depth, but aside from her, I'd only consider 4 characters to have good depth. Those being, in order of worst character to best, Ho, Anak, and Dorsey, and Khun, each of them having some combination of personality and depth, each with a different level of quality. Ho has basically no personality, but pretty strong depth. Anak has a decently strong personality and strong depth, and Dorsey has a strong personality and depth that's a bit weaker than Anak's, but ties into her personality better. And both Anak and Dorsey also have a significant badass aspect to their characters, as does Khun to a lesser extent, but Khun is by far the best character in the show, so I'm going to take a bit more time to talk about him. Khun is just a genuinely great character who is incredibly well fleshed out both for a 13-episode show and for this particular show. Khun is introduced as someone who tries to outthink the tests instead of just trying to beat them, which is inherently pretty interesting. For instance, in the first test, which will end when half the participants die, Khun doesn't go around fighting people. Instead, he finds people to bribe, using his magic bag to keep them safe until well after the test, in exchange for a favor at a later date. He continually makes plans that almost everyone else is basically incapable of figuring out, but he never feels too perfect. He has his own set of flaws, mainly his arrogance. Because he's so good at most things, he overestimates his capabilities, and there are moments in the show where he's clearly caught off guard because of it. Also, because a lot of Khun's actions have complex explanations, he has a lot of internal narration, which really helps you get inside his head and understand his thought process. He has a good reason for almost everything he does, but he rarely vocalizes them because he's not that type of character, so the narration also helps the audience understand those. And he changes as a person throughout the season, starting out with intense trust issues and only hanging out with Bam because he's interesting to Khun. But Khun is able to relate his own past struggles to Bam's current struggles, which causes Khun to seamlessly transition into being a really good friend to Bam, which in turn helps Khun's trust issues. This still doesn't make Bam a good character, but it does make Khun more interesting. And his unique relationship with other characters, personality, and flaws make for a lot of opportunities for really good depth that the series capitalizes on. I'm not sure I can really do justice to how well Khun is fleshed out in this video, but seriously, he's a great character. Something else I think the show does well, at least for the most part, are the tests. Tower of God has been compared to Hunter x Hunter a lot, and while I agree they're similar, I think most of the similarities are due to the tests. Both shows have tests that have a distinct strategic aspect, avoiding tests that are just, get MacGuffin 6, or punch person 9, and the way to pass the tests are never as simple as just, be at least this strong to move on. For instance, Tower of God has tests like teaming up with people you were just fighting to the death with, or picking the correct door out of dozens of options with the only clue being provided by a competitor who very well may be trying to make you fail. Even seemingly simplistic tests like the Crown Game, which is just a battle royale, or the game of tag have distinct strategic aspects, with the Crown Game having a set number of both rounds and teams who can participate in any given round, forcing the characters to be very careful about when they join the game. Or the game of tag having teams, each with half the characters on it, each taking turns playing against a ranker, who is someone who's already climbed the tower, and trying to either steal a tag from him or get one member of their team who holds a similar tag to escape the ranker. However, I think that Hunter x Hunter handles its tests better because they all develop the characters or their dynamics with each other in interesting ways. Tower of God does this in about 1 and 2 halves of its tests, but a lot of them have very little in terms of narrative or character development or impact, leaving them very cool and fun, but ultimately hollow. The worst abuser of this is the Crown Game. It starts out like a fun battle royale, with rules implemented to make it more strategic, but partway through, Anak and Bam interact for the first time, during which they make a bet where Bam and his team have to participate in the remaining rounds and win the entire game, with the Black March, you know, that totally awesome super cool anime sword that Yuri gave him at stake. At first, this is just background tension, but in the final round of the Crown Game, a lot happens. Rachel is revealed to have recently joined the testing group, Bam is knocked out, the scene happens, and Bam's team loses, causing Bam to lose the Black March, which he refused to give up even when his life was threatened. This sets up a ton of interesting situations. What did Bam miss because he was knocked out? How will he react to catching up to Rachel? What could the scene cause? And what will Bam's relationship with Anak be like now that they have not only interacted, but Anak has made him break the promise he made to return the Black March to Yuri? And none of these have any impact on anything. What are the consequences of Bam being knocked out? Nothing. Literally nothing. In fact, the show sets up that Bam might have missed a day of his class on how to be a wave controller and use Shinsu, but then the show goes, oh no, the wave controller was 2 days late, so Bam won't be behind everyone else. How will Bam react to catching up to Rachel? He basically doesn't, and doesn't interact with her even once until the end of the next test. What does the scene cause? Nothing. Well, it caused something in the webtoon back when it wasn't the scene, but that's been cut out. How will Bam react to losing the Black March? He doesn't care at all and just goes, well, guess I'll apologize to Yuri when I see her. What's Bam's relationship with Anak gonna be like? He talks to her literally one more time in the entire season, in which he says basically nothing. Now, the other tests aren't quite as bad as the Throne game, but they do tend to waste a lot of the potential they have. For another example, remember that test I mentioned where the characters are forced to form teams and Bam has to trick Rak into teaming up with him and Kun? Well, after this, despite having a lot of interesting potential for Rak getting over being tricked like this and starting to work with Kun and Bam, Rak just kinda gets over it in like 5 minutes, and that strips him of a lot of potential for interesting character growth. Though Rak is still really fun, basically being a tsundere crocodile man of war. The only tests that really have interesting impacts on the characters or the plot are the door one, which examines Kun's trust issues in a really interesting way, the second half of the game of tag, which develops Endorsi and has most of Hozark, and the part of the final test that focuses on Endorsi and Anak, but only that part. Now for a few things I wanted to discuss about the adaptation. As I mentioned in my introduction, the anime adapted 78 webtoon chapters into 13 episodes, and this was handled better than I think anyone could have really expected, with most of the important events translated over and a lot of the characters kept strong. However, a natural side effect of cramming 78 chapters into 13 episodes is that a lot of the stuff is very rushed and a good bit was cut out. I think the biggest victim of this is the character Shibisu. In the anime, he's pretty weak and mostly exists for comic relief, with most of his important moments either being footnotes or just him in the background of someone else's moment. In the webtoon, he started out as the weak comic relief character that he is in the anime, but quickly turned into the most human character in the series, who roots the audience in reality and helps us to properly contextualize how absurd the things that are happening are, but still tries to be a good person and help his friends as much as he can. In fact, when reading season 1 of the webtoon, Shibisu was probably my second favorite character after Kun. But in the anime, it's kind of hard to care about him. I think a good way of comparing how the two different versions of Shibisu were treated is the scene in the game of tag where he clings to the ranker's leg to try to stall him as long as possible. In the anime, it only lasts a couple seconds and happens in a flashback, making it seem much less important, and it happens immediately after slapstick, which makes the moment feel less serious, and Shibisu clearly didn't succeed in slowing the ranker down at all. Afterwards, the ranker comments in his own head that Shibisu was gonna pass the test anyway, so he didn't have to try so hard, but this moment doesn't really feel very strong because of the reasons I just listed. In the webtoon, however, this lasts much longer and happens in the present. It also makes it very clear that Shibisu clinging to the ranker's leg is genuinely slowing the ranker down, while also stopping the ranker from using his invisibility power. And while doing that and also getting hit by the ranker, he manages to convince Anak, the person the ranker is chasing, to keep running when she was clearly about to stop, single-handedly giving the team a chance to pass. Even after this, and with the ranker threatening his life, Shibisu still does his best to slow the ranker down, and then there's the line about how he would pass anyways. I think it's pretty clear which of these versions is more impactful, and most of Shibisu's other moments from the webcomic either received similar treatment or were cut out altogether. The next biggest thing, in my opinion, that was a victim of poor adapting was the scene. And I refuse to call it anything except the scene, not because something disgusting, hurtful, or just plain low quality happened, but because it causes such a bad plot hole that I'm surprised it hasn't collapsed in on itself and caused a black hole! But first, some context that I didn't mention earlier. You see, in Tower of God, characters are either rankers, who as I mentioned before are people who have already successfully climbed the tower, or regulars, who are currently climbing the towers. Most of the cast are regulars. However, there's one other category, irregulars, which are people who entered the tower on their own and don't have to follow the tower's rules. Bam is an irregular, and it just so happens that one of the tower's rules is that no one can use Shinsu on any given floor without first making a contract with the administrator of said floor. The scene takes place during the final round of the crown game. During this time, someone is attacking Rachel right in front of Bam, so he jumps in front of her and gets knocked out. In the webtoon, he instinctively summoned a very small amount of Shinsu that slashed at the attacker and hurt her. At this time, Bam had not yet made a contract with the floor's administrator, but he didn't use enough Shinsu to be noticeable by anyone except the examiners, so no one except them realizes that he's an irregular. In the anime, this happens. So if you're asking, what else did the anime change to compensate for the fact that everyone should realize Bam is an irregular, the answer is nothing. Nothing changes, this was entirely pointless, and I have no idea how someone who only saw the anime would have any idea of how to reconcile this with everyone in the shows treating Bam like he's weak and not realizing he's an irregular. And to make matters worse, Bam lashes out at the person who hurt Rachel and nearly kills them with the Black March, but later in the season someone else stabs Rachel in the back in front of him, and he just acts sad! Which makes no sense with this scene establishing Bam as someone who literally tried to kill someone who hurt Rachel much less than that. My point is that the scene is stupid and I'm moving on to something that I was pleasantly surprised by in the adaptation. The anime added in some good scenes of humanization, which if you don't know is usually defined as characters doing narratively pointless things just because they want to. This is mostly in episode 9, where it shows a cutaway to a side character tying an axe hair into a ponytail, and in episode 11, where the cast gets drunk after Ho's funeral. It's not much, but it was a lot of fun to see, so I thought I'd mention it. At the end of the day, I think Tower of God had some very strong ideas and plans behind it, but overall it was a fairly mediocre execution of those ideas. Though I'd still recommend you watch it if you haven't. I know I was pretty negative in this review and attached a lot of buts to my compliments, but that's mostly because most people already think the show is great and I was defending my point. But at the end of the day, the characters are mostly fun with a few standouts, the art style grows on you, its way of writing challenges, while not unique, is uncommon and fun, and I didn't mention this, but the music is also really good and does a great job drawing you into the world. I also read ahead, so I know season 2 is going to be great stuff. I'd give Tower of God a low 7 out of 10. Very good, but not great.